Today, I'm going to actually do a review on the Fuji X-T3. That's right, I'm going to do a review on a camera that came out in 2018 and show you why I think this is still a viable option today. All right, I'm going to read the facts directly off of Google because I know that I can never memorize any of this stuff. It is a 26.1 megapixel APS-C. It was released in 2018. If I remember correctly, it was released right before the Sony A7 III. It's got 4K, 60p, 10-bit video. I don't do video, so I really couldn't tell you anything about that. It's the X-Trans CMOS 4 sensor, weather-sealed magnesium body. 3.69 million dot EVF. That is one that you really have to see it to know. The electronic viewfinder on this thing is just absolute top notch. It far superior over the Sony A7 III, in my opinion. 16 film simulations and 11 to 30 frames per second shooting rate. I do have to say that 30 frames per second burst mode is no joke. Not only is it 30 frames per second, but it is complete blackout when you're using the electronic shutter. So what that means with no blackout is you're not seeing the screen flicker for each shot. It just stays continuous and shoots 30 frames per second. So be very careful with that, because I have accidentally shot at 30 frames per second shooting a ceremony, and I basically became a videographer that day. Now, let's start with the pros, and then I'll go into the cons about what I don't like about the camera. First, obviously Fuji's. You know, I love the setup of a Fuji. I love if I can get it to focus there, I love the dials on it. You know, just that you've got you have your ISO, your shutter here, that's your exposure compensation, and then your normal front and rear dials, just like on any other camera. On the back side, this here is the joystick for it. Obviously your different controls, and these are all programmable buttons that are on there. I have these ones set up for like my white balance, I think the film simulation, the face eye detection on or off, and I can't remember for sure, I might not even have this one assigned. Another part that is one of my favorites with these cameras is the way that the screens are. Now, I've always liked the screens that will flip down so that you kind of have more of that hip, kind of, you know, at the hip, shooting from the hip, and then it'll fold like this so that when I'm doing those overhead shots, I can see the screen. But then what it also does is it tilts out like this, so that when I'm shooting verticals and down low, I'm able to pop that screen out and see the screen. I'm not a big fan of screens that fold out over to the side, because they just kind of set me off center, and it just doesn't feel very natural. That, and they tend to be a little more flimsy. These are an extremely robust built screen that I don't feel like anything's going to really happen to it. Now, like on my X-T3 and on my X-T2, I do rock the battery grips on them. What that's going to add to you, which I believe, if I remember right, you can set this inside of the camera without it, but this right here is the boost or normal switch, which will increase the speed of the autofocus. It does use up more battery power, and that's why they give you the option of turning it on or off. But with the battery pack on it, with the two batteries running in here, I can usually shoot for a good 2-3 hours before I start draining down the batteries enough that I need to replace them. And then also on the battery grips, right here on the side, you have a little tab, and that's where you've got a DC plug-in. Now what that DC plug-in will do is provide constant power to the camera if you're doing like videography right now. If I've got it sitting on a stand and I'm recording video, I can have it plugged in and not have to worry about the batteries. Another one of my favorite parts on the Fujis. Now most cameras have these right here, but this is the little function button that's up on the front. What I have that assigned to do, see if I can get it to exchange. Oh, we can see it right through the camera. So I've got all of my different autofocus functions. So you've got your spot, zone, your wide. So like on your zone, we can change out the way that that zone is moving, and then just focus in right in that area. It's only going to select those areas. Then if I've got it running in constant, so usually when I'm shooting, say like a wedding ceremony, I'm just going to put the zone over onto the face, and I'm going to hold down the constant and let it sit there and focus on their face, you know, if they move over the side, whatever. If we go to, let's see if we can get this, I'm doing everything kind of backwards here, so it's kind of funky. Shooting through this lens into that lens. So I'll turn it over to all, and I will show you kind of how the constant works on this. You can see it focusing in on me there. No matter where I go, it's got me locked in. It's either going to lock my face or it's going to lock my eyes. Now, one of the big complaints on the Fuji systems is the autofocus. Unfortunately for Fuji, this camera came out right at the same time as the Sony A7 III did. Now, if you know anything about the Sony A7 III, it really revolutionized the way that autofocus worked on a camera. The Sony A7 III, the autofocus was just leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else. Everybody else kind of followed after that. Now, the inherent problem with a crop sensor camera is always going to be the autofocus system. It is a smaller sensor, so it just has less area. Myself, I really have not had a problem with the autofocus. I've shot ceremonies with the Sony A7 III, and I've shot them obviously with this and an X-T2. I haven't noticed the X-T3 really miss autofocus or miss capturing at least the face. The A7 III would be better about locking in on the eyes, where I notice on this one, I'll either get the eye or I'll get the face at least. And really, when it comes to autofocus, do we really need it focused dead in on the eye? If I'm shooting at a 5.6, it doesn't matter if it's just focusing in on the face area, the shot is still going to be in focus. My other favorite part, and obviously the biggest part of these cameras, it's the quality of the image itself. These cameras, they just have a life of their own. There's something about the Fuji cameras. I've said it before in other videos. I can see a photo that was taken on a Sony next to one that's on a Fuji, and I can tell you right away which one is the Fuji. And the other one is obviously the weight. I had shot on a Sony A7 III for some time, and then I also shot on the Nikon Z7. The Z7 is a very heavy camera, and I would put the A7 III right kind of in between. Not really a super heavy camera, but not quite as light as this. Now, on paper, the weight difference doesn't look like a whole lot, but when you're carrying two cameras around with you and a pouch with a couple extra lenses, it tends to get pretty heavy pretty quickly, especially when you're shooting 8, 10, 12 hours in a day. Now, depending on which lens you have on it, the weight obviously is going to vary greatly. Now on to the cons of the camera, the things that might not be too appealing about it. There is no in-body image stabilization in these cameras. They didn't put that into the XT cameras until the X-T4 that was released after this. But if you're using the Fuji lenses, they have the optical image stabilization built into them, which works extremely well. I can easily hand hold a shot to 1/30th, 1/20th of a second and not have any movement. So if you're super worried about in-body image stabilization, make sure you pick up a lens that has the optical image stabilization and you'll take care of it no problem. But usually what I'd say, you know, when you're shooting portraits, especially like weddings or anything like that, you're not shooting at that lowest shutter speeds. I always tell people, don't shoot generally under 1/100th of a second, because everybody kind of has a natural, I almost say a natural vibration to them. But there's just natural movements, even when somebody's trying to stay still, that can be picked up and look like it's an out of focus image when you're shooting at 1/30th, 1/20th, you know, even lower shutter speeds. Typically, I don't shoot below 1/100th of a second. And if I remember correctly, they say don't shoot below 1/60th of a second when you're shooting photos of people, but I could be completely wrong on that. Could have been something that I had heard years ago. I'm not sure. For some reason, that always sticks out in my mind. It might be because my film cameras, they'd say don't shoot below 1/30 or 1/60th of a second because you're going to get motion in it. Another one is the battery life. The battery life, honestly, is not the best in these cameras. The X-T3 does have the upgraded batteries from the X-T2 and like the X-T1 lines, but they're not that great. That is also why I always suggest having the battery grip, so you do at least have the 2 extra batteries on here. Another thing with that actually I'll put this in the pros, when you pop the battery grip off of these, unlike other battery grips, you don't actually have to remove the battery door on them. The battery door stays in place the entire time. The connection actually comes through here. So you could keep another battery inside of here while you've got your battery grip with your 2 batteries on it. Now, it's not going to use the one that's in the camera itself, as far as I know. I've never tried it. but you do at least have an extra battery that you can keep in there at all times if you wanted to. Another pro on these cameras that I absolutely love is the doors. They don't use those like typical kind of floppy, whatever, the rubber ones like this right here. They use actual plastic doors on them, so they're nice and rugged, rigid, whatever, and that's for those and for where the SD card goes. Now the other thing that's really neat on these, when I'm running tethered, you know, anything like this always got in the way. There's a little switch right here, and the door simply just pops right off, and then pops right back on. I always thought that was kind of a neat little thing that they put on there. You know, it keeps it out of the way when I've got a tether cable going to it. Another one that I kind of consider a con, I can't say it really is, but it's how far the viewfinder actually sticks out. Kind of hard to get to focus on this, but it doesn't stick out too far off of the body. So I tend to end up with a lot of marks from my face on the screen. Not a deal breaker at all, but some people don't like that. But really, even my A7 III and my Nikon, same kind of way. I know within the Fuji line, your XH series, they do have the viewfinder sticking out quite a ways more, so your face isn't interfering with it. But myself, I really have never had that as an issue. But it is something that some people don't really like. Forgot to also include on here, the screens on these are touch screens. Maybe not so much like a newer one, but it does have, where it has the touch autofocus to it. And then also when you're reviewing images, you can zoom in on it and all that good stuff. But yeah, that is my quick overview, my quick review on the Fuji X-T3. Seriously, this camera came out in 2018, and this is still such an amazing camera. I think what a lot of people tend to forget is the advances that they've come out with cameras here in recent years have been very, very small. You know, they really made their big leaps and bounds between about 2015 to 2019, 2018, somewhere in there. And it's all been really, really incremental. So a camera coming back from even 2016 is very much a viable option these days. I still have an X-T2 that I shoot weddings with that serves as kind of my backup, my second camera. My X-T3 is still my main camera body shooting weddings going into 2026. You can pick one of these up for just a little under $1,000, maybe $1,000. And they are definitely something to be looking into. Save yourself some money, great images, amazing build. I highly, highly suggest checking them out.